I was sitting right there in Karen's living room, sipping a cold beer with her husband Spencer while we joked about weekend plans, when a piercing scream shattered everything normal about the moment. Before I could even react, a heavy thud hit the floor above us so violently the entire house trembled. My heart collapsed into my stomach as I bolted upright. Seconds later, I realized the horrifying truth. The scream came from my son. That image still burns in my head. Welcome to Prodigy Tales. Make sure you like and subscribe for your top-notch HOA drama. You're probably wondering how on earth I ended up drinking beer in the home of the same woman who once threatened to fine me for leaving my trash bin out for 8 minutes. Trust me, I wondered too. Everything began weeks before, when I exposed Karen for mismanaging HOA funds. She'd been blowing community money on overpriced vanity decor, bizarre personal purchases, and whatever shiny distraction caught her eye. During the HOA meeting, I presented undeniable proof: receipts, statements, screenshots. The board froze in shock. Karen's face twitched like she swallowed a lemon dipped in battery acid. And when they suspended her, the humiliation painted her expression so perfectly I could have framed it. At the time, I assumed she would throw a tantrum, start petty wars, maybe shove passive aggressive notes in my mailbox again, the usual Karen nonsense. What I didn't expect was the eerie calm that followed. No shouting, no threats, no dramatic porch ambushes, nothing. For once, she vanished into silence, which should have been the warning sign carved in neon letters. But I ignored it, thinking the universe had finally granted me peace. Huge mistake, because while I relaxed, Karen's mind was cooking something foul, something twisted, something completely off the rails. Before we dive in deeply, let us know in the comments what country or which city you're watching this story from. We'd love to know how far this story travels. To my greatest surprise, Karen showed up at my door a few days after the HOA meeting with the fakest smile I had ever seen. She thanked me, yes, thanked me for what I did. She said the suspension was a blessing in disguise and that she was finally taking time to work on herself. I just stared at her like she had grown 3 extra heads. Karen, the same woman who once summoned the entire board because my grass was 2 inches taller than regulation, was now thanking me for humiliating her publicly. My brain couldn't compute it. Her voice was calm, sweet even, like she'd swallowed a motivational podcast. She told me she's trying to be better and that she needed the break to reset her life. I wanted to laugh, but the seriousness in her eyes made me hesitate. Either she'd found Jesus or she'd found a new level of manipulation. Then she brought up her son Terry asking for a playdate with my son Dylan. That part wasn't strange. They had played together before. Spencer and I even coached their kids' soccer practice once. But the timing, the sudden peace offering, the perfectly polished apology, everything felt staged. She said she didn't want adult differences getting in the way of their friendship and that she hoped we could start fresh. Fresh? With Karen? That sounded like a setup wrapped in glitter. But kids are kids, and Dylan adored Terry. So despite my instincts screaming no like a fire alarm, I eventually agreed. But I added one condition: I'd accompany Dylan to the playdate. Karen blinked a little too fast, like she hadn't expected that part, but she smiled through it and said Friday would be perfect. The whole night before the playdate, my mind spun in circles. Was I paranoid? Was she genuine? Was I walking into a trap? I kept trying to shake the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine, but it clung to me the entire time. Even then, I had no idea how justified that feeling was, or how fast everything was about to spiral out of control. Friday showed up bright and calm, the kind of morning that made everything feel normal again. I took Dylan to Karen's house without a single worry in my mind. Spencer answered the door looking genuinely happy to see us, like he'd been waiting to show off how peaceful his home felt lately. And honestly, it did feel peaceful. The living room smelled like cinnamon and warm air, sunlight coming through the windows, toys scattered around like any regular family home. Dylan ran upstairs to Terry's room the second he kicked his shoes off, laughing and shouting Terry's name as he went. Spencer and I settled into the living room with 2 cold beers, talking about sports, weekend barbecues, and the neighborhood gossip that didn't involve Karen for once. Everything felt easy, comfortable. I wasn't tense. I wasn't suspicious. I was relaxed for the first time in weeks. Spencer joked about finally getting some quiet in the house now that Karen was taking self-improvement seriously. I laughed, shaking my head, thinking maybe, just maybe, the suspension really did soften her. A few minutes later, Karen walked into the room, smiling like a friendly neighbor instead of the HOA tyrant she usually was. She said she was going to check on the boys and headed upstairs. I barely paid attention. I wasn't watching her closely, wasn't counting her steps, wasn't reading into anything. There was simply no reason to. But then everything changed. A scream tore through the house. High, terrified, and unmistakably Dylan's. My heart stopped mid-beat. Spencer's beer hit the floor before he even realized he dropped it. Then a deafening thud crashed from outside, shaking the entire house. I ran faster than I ever have in my life, yanked the front door open, and what I saw shattered something inside me forever. Dylan was lying on the porch beneath the balcony, his small body crumpled unnaturally on the concrete. Blood pooled beneath his head, dark and spreading. His chest barely moved. His mouth hung open like he was trying to breathe, but couldn't find the air. I dropped to my knees, screaming his name, my hands trembling so violently I couldn't hold him. My vision blurred with tears. My voice cracked as I begged him to wake up, begged him not to leave me. Karen appeared on the balcony above, shouting, "He jumped! I swear he jumped!" Spencer called 911 with shaking hands while I held onto my son and terrified he might slip away before help arrived. The paramedics reached Dylan before I could even understand half the questions they were firing at me. They knelt beside him on the porch, checking his pulse, his breathing, the depth of the head wound. One of them lifted his eyelids with a gloved thumb and whispered a tense order for more equipment. Another strapped an oxygen mask over his face while calling in a possible pediatric trauma. I stood frozen, gripping the porch railing so tightly my knuckles went numb, every second stretching into something unbearable. When they finally stabilized him enough to transfer, they promised to do everything possible, but their eyes made it clear nothing was guaranteed. Only after Dylan was rushed toward the ambulance did the police begin asking questions. Officers separated everyone immediately. Spencer stood pale and shaking on the grass while Karen tried to compose herself behind the patrol car, insisting she barely saw anything. Then Terry stepped forward, tears streaking his face, voice trembling as he told them exactly what happened. He said his mother called Dylan onto the balcony, told him to lean closer, then shoved him without hesitation. The officers listened carefully, then asked Spencer's permission to view the footage from Terry's room camera. Within minutes, everything Terry said was confirmed. The video showed Karen grabbing Dylan's wrist, yanking him toward the railing, and pushing him off with a coldness that made even the officers recoil. There was no panic, no hesitation, just cruelty caught in perfect clarity. That was all they needed. Karen was handcuffed calmly, silently, with none of her usual theatrics. She didn't scream, she didn't argue. She just stared forward as if she'd finally realized there was no lie big enough to save her. In court, everything unfolded with clinical precision. Karen was sentenced to 22 years in state prison for attempted murder and child endangerment. She was ordered to pay $468,000 in restitution, plus $150,000 in punitive damages, forcing the sale of her home and draining every account she owned. Her HOA power, reputation, and life vanished in a single morning. Meanwhile, Dylan slowly recovered, first a hand squeeze, then small words, then steady progress that felt like hope returning one breath at a time. The end.